Welcome to the Social Leader Podcast, inspired by entrepreneurs, faith leaders, founders, innovators, volunteers, and visionaries from every walk of life. Social leaders are the social venturers among us, those who crave the entrepreneurial adventure of moving beyond charity to integrate and then operationalize their social priorities. Social leaders are the true leaders among us who are trying to forge sustainable solutions to solve humanity's most tangled problems. Welcome to the show. I'm Father Justin Matthews. And hey, real quickly before we begin, I want to let you know that the Social Leader Podcast is presented by Reconciliation Services. We're a nonprofit social venture at 31st and Troost in Kansas City, Missouri, working to cultivate a community seeking racial and economic reconciliation to reveal the strength of all. And if you're inspired by today's show, and if you want to learn how to lead with greater creativity, authenticity, and impact, then you've got to check out our brand new course called the Social Leader Essentials. When you enroll in this course, you're going to get over 2.5 hours of leadership training that are going to help you to adopt a social entrepreneurial mindset, help you to root out bias in yourself and in your teams, and then help you to embrace a trauma-informed, strength-based leadership style. And hey, the coolest part of this whole thing is that all of the proceeds from this e-course are used to fuel the social and trauma therapy programs at Reconciliation Services. So I want to invite you to enroll today. Go to thesocialleader.org, and I look forward to having you as part of the course. Well, today I am incredibly honored to have Representative Congressman Emanuel Cleaver here on the Social Leader Podcast. Welcome, Congressman Cleaver.
Thanks for the invitation. Good to be with you.
Oh, it's fantastic to have you on. I know you're so busy. We are just before a massive election. There's so much happening in the country, and we're going to get into a lot of things. The president just actually tweeted out that there's going to be a potential cessation to any negotiations around a stimulus package, a second stimulus package for American people. And we've got a lot to talk about, not just politics, but we want to learn from you, Congressman, about leadership. And you've been a social leader from the time that you were a pastor ordained in the 70s and all the way to when you were a city council and then a mayor in Kansas City, and now obviously a multi-term congressman serving on behalf of Missouri in the 5th District. I'd love for you to just share in brief, Congressman, a little bit about your leadership journey. How'd you go from Methodist pastor to being a multi-term congressman?
Well, I grew up in a family of ministers. I'm a native of Texas, and one of the rare parts of my life is that I have one of the few families, African American families, that can go back deep into slavery. I mean, my dad is Lucky Cleaver. He's 98 years old and still in charge of his faculties. His father's Leroy Cleaver. His father's is Noah Albert. His father's Frank. His father's Pledge. His father, my great-great-great-grandfather, is Frank Jr., so Senior. So we can go back further than almost anybody you're going to find. But they took a route with the ministry, and they did the sacerdotal. They believed that the ministry was marrying people and doing communion, preaching the gospel, going out to visit the sick and so forth. And then on the other side of my family, that is just as loved, are some of the names that are probably not as familiar to this generation, but they were known all over the world at one time. And one is Eldridge Cleaver, who was the third ranking member of the Black Panther Party, had a bestseller called Soul on Ice. He has a very interesting life. He was an activist with the Panthers and got into trouble. He went to prison. And then Pete O'Neill was the leader of the Black Panther Party here in Kansas City. This generation probably won't recognize his name, but you start talking to people, the baby boomers, or maybe the generation before that, they would know Pete O'Neill. He's in exile in Tanzania now. So I had a choice of which way I was going to go. And I think I've married the two, the ministry part of my family background and the activist part. without the some of the components of the Black Panthers.
Yeah,
And
it's amazing to look at how those two things are on similar trajectories to some degree about taking care of people, but at the same time have very different tactics. And if ever there was a role of the church in reconciliation, it sounds like you've sort of embodied that in your own church history, extracting the precious from the worthless in your life and trying to mold an identity and a social leadership.
Well, yeah, many people probably don't know that the program that provides breakfast in schools all over the country was actually started by the Black Panthers.
Right.
And in here in Kansas City, the parsonage of the St. James United Methodist Church, before I was the pastor, was used by the Panthers for their breakfast program.
Wow.
And it's just an amazing kind of a thing that's taken place, because whether you're a Black Panther or a Methodist, we're supposed to feed the hungry. I think on both sides you would have an agreement. We're supposed to feed those who are hungry. Let the little children come unto me. Do not hinder them. And so I think that they do come together without some of the hostility that we saw back in the late 60s and 70s.
Well, and you take us actually with that comment right into modern times, because look, if we see anything right now in our country, we see very divergent visions of how to love one another, how to care for one another, very divergent visions of how different groups believe that we ought to be caring for the marginalized and the poor. And the one thing that seems to really have broken down, that you've championed, I think, all throughout your ministry and your career as a politician and a social leader, is this idea of civil discourse, how to practice civil discourse, the necessity of practicing civil discourse. And it feels like, correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like civil discourse has just totally gone out the window. And that leaves so many Americans struggling to survive and succeed. Talk to us about the importance of civil discourse, and how do we begin to even practice it in the times that we're living in now?
Well, I think that historians will probably be able to identify the moment that the civil discourse in the United States began to go downhill. But what I do know is that in the late 80s, civil discourse began to journey through the junkyard of communications, and I don't know if it was created through the removal of the Johnson Amendment, which no longer required that media companies do both sides of an issue. Previous to the Johnson Amendment, the Federal Communications required that if you had anything that was said by one particular political party, you have to have somebody on the other side. You had to be fair and balanced for real. And so that was eliminated, and that gave way to talk radio, which I think, or caustic radio, which I think really went out and created this toxicity that has engulfed almost all of the country. We are in the middle of it. And people need to understand, in particular as it relates to the government, it's like bees. I love watching these animal shows and insect shows. I mean, the bees can't sting and make honey at the same time.
Mm.
The colony is separated. The honey makers. And that's what I think we have to do. We have to decide whether we want a nation of stingers or a nation of honey makers. I think honey is a lot sweeter than stingers.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that analogy before, and I'm going to hold on to that one. I appreciate that a lot. Not wanting to be able to that you can't sting and you can't make honey at the same time. You can't collect the pollen and sting at the same time. So let's get specific on it. At one point in time, you wrote about the movement to defund police in the middle of the protests that are going on. You said, quote, that the defund the police slogan is a, quote, spine-chilling and nightmarish name for a masterful idea. The idea obviously being to re-engineer police and to address systemic racism and brutality where it may be found and across the country. I want to focus on civil discourse again, because if your aim is civil discourse, why is the slogan defund the police so problematic to you? Why do you call it nightmarish?
Well, because where we have gone in our society is to come up and communicate in the most negative way, the most confrontational way, and so instead of saying let's reform the police, everybody can say, oh well, yeah, that's a good idea. For some of us, we have to say something that's going to get people riled up, because we think only if they get riled up was this a good idea. So let's defund the police. Now, I have a little 4-year-old grandson who can tell you that the life in this country would be chaotic, may not even exist as a nation if we had no laws and law enforcement individuals. So when people came out and said defund the police, they could have easily said, look, it's becoming crystal clear that police departments need to look at 21st century ways to function. I mean, for example, right now, and I have a friend here in Kansas City whose son was schizophrenic, and he was a troubled young man. And one day, the son goes out in Brookside with a knife on the lawn. His father comes out and tries to get it, and he, of course, is waving the knife at his son. So his father called what everybody else calls, which was the police. The police came out, shot him 16 times in front of his dad in the front yard. And so here's the thing that I think people need to understand. I hope people can understand, is that there probably needs to be an entire division of the police department that deals with people who are obviously having mental episodes. And so you're saying defund the police, and all you're doing is creating enemies. You're creating opposition. And some people don't think life is worth living unless they have some opponents. And based on Jesus, you don't have to say anything negative with intentionality. All you have to do is try to do good, and you can get some enemies. So then if that's the case, then why don't you just do good if you're going to get enemies anyway?
Yeah. What would you say? I agree with your sentiment personally, because I work here on Troost Avenue, and I have since, I've done this kind of work for the last 22 years, since 2009 here on Troost. And I see those folks who are struggling with senility. I see those folks who you're talking about who are really not wanting to entangle themselves with law enforcement, but that are not well. And their behaviors are aggressive, and there's posturing from police and from the individuals, and it just escalates and escalates. And I think a lot of our work at 31st and Troost is actually to try to de-escalate things before anybody even, calls the police. But let me ask you a question. Some people would point to Jesus and they would say, look, Jesus turned the tables over. Jesus, called people hypocrites, and he called them whitewashed tombs, right? Now, I agree with you that the law of the Lord is love completely, and that commandment is the greatest commandment, to love God, to love your neighbor. But at the same time, there are people out there on the protest line who are saying, I believe in peaceful protests. There are others who are saying, peaceful protest isn't getting us where we need to go. And so they're agitating, and in some cases it's getting violent, and in some cases there's even looting. There's a lot of people that are listening, though, that I think when we talk about civil discourse, these issues all get conflated. The words that we choose, the actions that we take. And people get frustrated when they're always trying to toe the line on one side or on the other. What do you say to those people who are losing hope? What do you say to those people who say, we've got precedent to do more than love. We need to protest. And in some cases, we need to protest in a way that gets attention. Without casting judgment on either side, in the light of civil discourse, how do you respond to that? And what would you instruct us to do better?
One of my lifelong guiding individuals is a man by the name of James Lawson, Reverend James Lawson, who pastored in Los Angeles up until about 15 years ago when he retired. Jim Lawson went to prison because he wouldn't go to the Korean War, and he eventually was released from prison. He went to spend time in India with Gandhi. He graduated from seminary and pastored in Nashville, and ended up being his most famous student was a guy by the name of Michael King, who eventually had his name changed to Martin Luther King after his dad. Well, I've said that to marchers in Kansas City, protesters in Kansas City. Martin Luther King never, ever led a demonstration where a person was killed.
Amen.
Now that's an amazing statement. Now, the point was to dramatize wrong where wrong was, and that Dr. King believed that the majority of the people are good and decent human beings, and that they will condemn wrong. And so the point for John Lewis being beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge was that the whole world would see it. I mean, John Lewis wasn't looking to get a plate put inside his head, but the world saw it. And so when we demonstrate, we don't need, first of all, we need to do it in daylight. The point is to be seen. We want people to see and hear and respect what we're saying. And if people had come out with Martin Luther King with guns and bats and brass knuckles, just a street fight. But here are these people who are deeply religious, and they're putting their religion in action. It's not a cerebral thing. They are actually demonstrating to the world what they believe, and they're willing to be hurt in doing it. And I've told demonstrators, you can't find footage of a Martin Luther King led march at night. So, they were always peaceful. In fact, because I grew up in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, of which Dr. King was the president, you couldn't even march if you couldn't go through the nonviolent training. Jim Lawson taught it. Was the first person to teach nonviolent training. So for somebody like me, if I'm going through the training, there's a white person standing next to me and calling me the N-word, and I've got to be able to ignore that and keep my head on target for the goal, which is to show the world what this man is doing, and the world will see the wrongness of it. And that's how we were able to get civil rights legislation, whether it was the Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act. All of that came as a result of people being peaceful, and all of the change we have in this society right now wasn't done with guns. It was done with peace.
By the way, if anybody is joining us right now, and if you are inspired or if you have a question for Congressman Cleaver, we are live on Facebook and on Twitter. Feel free to comment, particularly from the Facebook page, and I'll see if I can bring you in. Congressman, I really am inspired by what you're saying, and I've often thought about this, that one of the big differences between the protests and the early civil rights movement from the 50s to 65 and up until maybe 68, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. One of the differences was there was a clear leader, there was a clear religious authority or some kind of moral authority that stood outside of our opinions or our politics that was sort of guiding the way that we interacted. And there was training. I mean, you brought it up. You could not go do a sit-in unless you were trained. And there were white folks and black folks, young and old, who were trained to do this kind of work. But we live in a time now where it's all crowdfunded, right? Everything is crowdfunded and sourced socially. And there's power to that. There's power to get a message out that way. But also it presents some pretty significant challenges. What would your vision be for moving forward as we try to make change? We have this social crowd aspect, and we have this history of how peaceful protest and nonviolence was done successfully. How would you bring those two together, Congressman?
Well, I hope people realize that that nonviolent protests actually defeated an entire nation and led to the creation of the nation now called India. And Gandhi was an amazing human being who was able to get people to nonviolently confront their oppressors, and they did it in a way that led to the movement here in the United States. Martin Luther King was the head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It's often said that he was the leader of the civil rights movement. The reason most people say that is because he stood out far and above the other leaders like Whitney Young, who was one of the big four at the time, called the big four African American leaders. But Martin Luther King stood out, and I think he stood out for a number of reasons. One was his guide was Jesus, and I think he did it in a way that was never too far away from what the gospel would say. I mean, Martin Luther King preached Matthew 25. I think that Matthew 25 is as relevant right now as it was in 1965.
Right, the parable of the sheep and the goats, and that we'll be judged not on a theology test or not on some other ideology, but we're going to be judged on how we cared for the least of these.
Right.
Because in as much as you did it unto them, you did it unto me. Just people don't remember that one. Yeah,
I would tell anybody watching us, if you get a chance, read Matthew 25 and read it in terms of getting your marching orders. That because your marching orders are given in Matthew 25, and I think that, and I'm I have never been booed standing up telling people right here in Kansas City, down on the plaza with 4,000 or 5,000 young people, hey, look, let's march during the day. You want to be seen. And I was in Ferguson. Most of the demonstrations during the day were peaceful. When the nightfall set, that's when we had the anarchists coming in and doing enormous damage to the movement. And that's what happened around the country.
We're seeing the same thing again today, again and again.
Yeah, it's tragic. But I am still convinced that we can make change and dramatic change non-violently and peacefully. Because now it won't work unless I'm correct in my belief that the majority of the people in this country are good and decent people. Now, like everybody else, all of us, from time to time slip out of the light into the darkness. But for the most part, we all want to be in the light.
Yeah, I think 99% of people have good intentions. And that's why I think even when we talk about the issues of racism and institutional racism, it's difficult for people who don't think of themselves as racist to understand how we can inadvertently, intentionally, and unintentionally participate in things that oppress our brothers and sisters, oppress our neighbors, and often work in our own, not in our own self-interest. I want to ask you a question related to this, to protest and to civil discourse, though. There's a lot of talk about being anti-racist, and certainly daytime peaceful protest is a wonderful way that we can be public about where we stand and to advocate for change. But there's also the role of personal study. There's also the role of doing the hard heart work ourselves of addressing our own racism. But how are we to be anti-racist without being performative? Like, how are we to undertake that work? Particularly, I'm thinking about my white brothers and sisters who are wanting to be standing in the front to advocate for our neighbors, to put our bodies in front of their bodies when there are bodies being brutalized. How is it that we can do that work without coming off as inauthentic or being performative, particularly in social media?
Yeah. I think everybody needs to go through moments of introspection, and I also believe that we have to go through self-interrogation, and because there are a lot of good and decent people who will say things that are offensive to a whole race of people, and then they would say, "But I'm not racist." And one of the reasons I don't use the word racist, I don't call people racist, at least I don't call people that name, is because when you do that, you lose communication. That's the end of communications. And so what I would rather do is say, I have a good friend who was trying to say something to me about a situation, and in the situation, because we are friends, longtime friends, he used the N word, and I said, hey, wait just a minute. I said, you can't. Not only my wife and children haven't heard this. My closest friends haven't heard me use that name. And he said, well, I know, but I thought we were friends. It has nothing to do with friendship. I said, you don't use that word. And so the good news out of that is he said, I guess you're going to have to continue to look at me as a student as it relates to the issue of race. And I said, the reason we have a good friendship is because what you just said, that you realize that you don't have it all together on that issue. And I think people, they don't realize sometimes that things are racist, other than being a Klan member. A lot of people have mistakenly come to the conclusion that, well, I'm not a member of the Klan. I don't burn crosses on people's lawns. I don't use the N word, so I'm not a racist.
Right.
And so and they are convinced of it. I heard a guy on TV saying he wasn't a racist, and everything that he did would lead even Stevie Wonder to see that that's something that's racist. But
there might be a few people on TV these days that are like that. Well, let me ask another question, because you're getting at something that actually gets very practical. Because when we're talking about racism and we're talking about how to protest, how to help one another, there's a big debate going on right now, like I talked about at the beginning of the podcast, about whether or not to have a second federal stimulus for Americans who are suffering in the wake of the pandemic. And today I watched the Fed chair talked about the fact that unemployment is declining, the economy is getting better, but he tempered that by saying that, look, it's all going to depend on what happens with the virus in the coming months in this pandemic, whether or not we're actually able to sustain that kind of forward growth in our economy. But then today, the president came out with a tweet not long before we came on, and he said that he is suspending all conversation or all discussion about any kind of second stimulus. Now, look, I don't want to debate the politics and who people are going to vote for, and I know where you're going to vote. What I do want to talk about is the impact of that. When we get to a place where we can't reach consensus, what do we do? Because the Congress feels like it's at a deadlock completely right now, and it's not the first time. How do we try to move from this kind of gridlock and deadlock and polarization to get to some place of consensus? Give it some practical and tactical for us, given our situation today.
I don't think there's anything that should come up that is beyond a conversation. And I think what we've just done is about the worst thing you can do to get things done, and that is to say we're not even going to have communication. Jay Powell is absolutely right. He's required by law to appear before my committee twice a year, and as the Federal Reserve Chair. And what Ben Bernanke has also said, who was Jay Powell's predecessor as the Fed chair, they said, look, interest rates are lower now than they've been since the planet was created by God. So if you're going to use money, if you're going to borrow money, this is the time to do it because it's cheap. And right now, the issues that are being debated are, do we give people $600 a week for a time period certain, and so that they can spend that money, putting that money out into the economy, and of course the $1,200. That's the point of the separation right now, $600. Some are saying, no, that's too much money to give people. People like me are saying the fact that we're saying that's a lot of money points to where we are in terms of a minimum wage in this country. If $600 a week is more than the minimum wage, then we're in trouble, which it is, of course. And so the other part of it is whether or not we're going to bail out or provide some assistance to the state and local governments. Now, to people who are watching us, probably they're saying, well, I'm not into that. I am interested in the $600 and the $1,200. But what you need to understand is cities like Kansas City depend not exclusively, but quite a bit on its sales tax revenues. Well, if all of the shopping centers are closed, if most of the restaurants are closed, if most of the nightclubs are closed, most of the places where you can spend money are closed, your sales tax revenues are going to drop appreciably. And that means services are going to dry up. So many of us are saying we got to help the local communities. You're talking about defunding the police. You don't help help bail out the communities. You're going to end up defunding the police because there's not going to be enough money to keep the police force at the level it is, or the fire department where it is. So these are critical issues, and I still think the government shouldn't necessarily be in our lives every day, but there is a role. And right now, in the middle of the worst pandemic in a century, with over 210,000 Americans having died, I think the government does have a role, and I think it would be governmental malpractice if we didn't step in right now and try to pump money into the economy by giving people money to just make it until their jobs came back. We have right now unemployment in double digits in this country.
And even worse in some neighborhoods, like east of Troost, where I'm working, there are neighborhoods that have exceedingly higher unemployment than that. You're talking like 24% in some cases, and that was prior to the pandemic. And those same neighborhoods are, also not coincidentally because of the history, 91% African American. I'm thinking one neighborhood in particular. I just read the math on it. So let me make some of those things that you're talking about really personal for people, because I think when they hear congressmen talk about the hundreds of thousands and the billions and even, 600 a person times 2.2 trillion, whatever. Here's the thing. Since March, Reconciliation Services has had a 56% increase in new clients coming for social and trauma therapy services. We're talking almost 200% of our budget that we were planning on. We're now at over 200% of the budget for rent and utilities. And there is a tidal wave to come. I mean, Congressman, there was a woman who came the other day that had an over $4,000 water bill. Not just because she lost her job, because she was working as a waitress, not just because, she's not derelict of duty in her finances. She couldn't pay it. But then on top of that, her water main broke on the homeowner's side of her house, and there's no stopping the meter. She doesn't have the money to pay the bill, let alone, to go and dig it up and fix the pipe with a contractor. So she's walking in buried in utility debt. And there's only so much we can do. And so to your point also about why it's important for states and counties and local neighborhoods to have that support at the top, from my perspective, we're just found out today that we're actually a beneficiary of the Missouri CARES Act, that we're going to be able to get some help to reimburse some of the work that we've been doing out of our limited savings to help our neighbors. We also were able to get the PPP so that we could continue operating and keep all of our staff employed. I have 25 staff members that are full-time and contractors, and they all were able to keep their jobs. And so, we need each other. No matter where we are on the political perspective or the spectrum, we need each other. And I think that's what you're saying. But I want to ask you something, though, because, look, I'm 43 years old. I'm relatively young. The thing is, it seems like worse than it's ever been in my lifetime. But you've had this long career, living all the way from the civil rights work that you did and your family did all the way till now in Congress. Congressman, put this in context for us, for me. How bad is it really? Like, what are we facing down right now as a country economically and in terms of civil unrest? Is it as bad as some people think that it is?
Well, I grew up in Texas during the Jim Crow era. I've seen a lot of things. I've heard a lot of things, and unfortunately, I've experienced a lot of things. And I can tell you, without fear of being contradicted, that this is a moment of hate that I have not felt before. Now, I struggle when in my alone moments with whether it's the hate is so visible now as opposed to when I was a kid, because of the medium, the media. We are able to see it, and we can see it all day long on 24-hour cable channels, and but it's just strong. I could tell you about some things that are happening right now with me, but as it relates to hate. But let me just say that we are in a moment that I've not seen. And I grew up when my three sisters and I had to get off the sidewalk, and we were taught as little kids. You walk on the sidewalks in downtown Dallas or downtown Waxahachie, where I grew up. You have to get off the sidewalk if there are white people coming from the other direction or behind you. You have to get off the sidewalk. You know that's the way it is. And I have seen hatred to the point where somebody's house was burned down because they had dared to stand up to and question a man in authority. Now, right now, I was standing out in front of the World War I museum and memorial on Saturday at about 3:00 with my son and another friend, when a guy drove by, stopped his car, and began to scream at us about things. And we remained silent, thank God, because everybody has a gun now, and so I'm just seeing things and feeling things that I have never felt and seen in my entire life. And we are better than this. And I think that those of us who understand that there is a God somewhere, that this is not like a godless universe. There is a God, and that God is paying attention to, but will not interfere with what's going on. We have to do it. We're the eyes, the arms, and of God, and we have to act, and we can change things. But right now, this is not a good moment in our history, and we need more men and women to commit themselves to cooling things off. We need to go through a cooling period politically, I think, and even economically. And just let's cool things down. And one of the reasons I've never run a negative ad on television in all my years, and the reason is that I think people tell the public what kind of an official they're going to be by the kind of campaign they run. I mean, if I'm out calling people names in my campaign and attacking, why do they think when I get to Congress I'm going to be nice and willing to work with people? I mean, I've already told you this is who I am, and that's unfortunate for the political world.
There's a question from Jody I'm going to put on the screen here. She said, how do you stay positive or optimistic in the midst of uncertainty, Congressman?
Well, because I am, maybe I am Pollyannish. I think good wins all the time. But a lot of times, by the time the win comes, they got, tape and, cast on the legs and so forth. I think that happens. But all you have to do to join me in this wild, crazy optimism is to realize that all you have to do is look at where we are. Let me look at the things of history. Hitler did not win. He lost. Right. Mussolini lost. Tojo lost. Pharaoh lost. I mean, look, there is no history where the evil was sitting on the throne. And these are tough times. My goodness, I will never mislead anybody into believing that these are some nice, easy, romantic times. They are not, but they will be and all we need is like the caller is not to quit. We need her because I think she's going to be a part of the reason we win.
Yeah. Let me ask you a final question as we start to wrap up, Congressman. There are a lot of people listening today who may or may not agree with your politics, but they agree with, although many do, but they agree with the spirit that you're bringing to it. They agree that we all need to be social leaders. Look, if we're going to really try to make our way through this, what does good winning look like? Like, can you give us a vision for what we can all aim at together? Because there are people, obviously, you and I both know that think that if one candidate wins in November, that we're going to be this way, and another candidate wins, we're going to be headlong into, Marxism. I mean, so there's so much division. What does good winning look like for all of us? Is there any place that we can come together as a nation on, in your perspective?
I have advocated, and you'll probably hear more about this in January, because I'm going to do it more vocally than I've done it in the past, that whoever wins the presidency, both sides of the aisle, hopefully we will say, look, right at the beginning of this new administration or the renewal of an administration, what we're going to do is not introduce any of the caustic legislation until March or April. Let's try to get the things that we all agree on right now. We're going to deal with those things. Go through a period of healing where we try. We put an effort on it. We don't try to conceal it or hide it. We try to let people know that we want to work together. And I think that, I walk around in Washington, and you'd be surprised at the people who are in the other political party who will tell me, this is just awful what we're going through, and everybody is looking for another day. Everybody's looking for a bright new day, and I think that, and we're the majority, and I think we have to do it. And even if we lose, even if we are not able to stop it, we can't back up ourselves. We have to continue to do it. I mean, that is my job. I don't know if, I'm not going to be in the history books, but while I'm here, I would like for it to be said that, he tried when he saw wrong to make it right. And when he saw bigotry, he tried to erase it. I think we have to do it in our individual lives. And I think a lot of people are thinking about some huge movement to do it, but right. You can do it in your block, do it in your school, your workplace, and the world is getting a little bit better every time you and I touch the lives of others.
Yeah, there's an old saying in my church tradition. I'm an Orthodox Christian priest, and the saying says that through the cross, joy comes into all the world. And that idea of the cross, or our own personal struggle, our own personal, effort to forgive, or our willingness to endure the beating, or to endure the loss, or to endure whatever hardship comes our way. We have to give thanks for both the good things and the hard things and the bad things, because it's through the cross that joy comes into the world. So you've said this one important thing. You said, look, if we want to come together after the election, whoever wins, we need to have a cooling off period where we start passing some things that are easy for us to agree on. So I hear you say we need to build consensus as social leaders where we can, where there's low-hanging fruit. What are maybe two other things that you would share with our leaders who want to increase their social impact from whatever their leadership lane is? What are two or three other things that you would encourage them to do that are your personal practices in social leadership?
We need to take a risk. People end up just associating with people of their own race, of their own denomination, of their own neighborhood, because it is a risk. It is risky to go out and try to establish something on the other side. People are afraid they might get hurt, and they might. I'm not talking about physically, but that they can get their feelings damaged. Look, we are resilient humans that God made us, and to be resilient. And so, but we've got to be able to risk. The worst kind of person in the world is somebody who's risk adverse. I think they are dangerous, because that means they're not going to create anything. They're not going to do anything significant because they're afraid of the risk. The other thing is that, hopefully we can create a leadership group in the country right now. I believe that leaders should always eat last, and you're dramatizing that right there on the corner of 31st Street and Truce. When I say leaders eat last, I mean we have to be sacrificial. We have to do things that might push us in a situation. I mean, you could probably make a lot more money if you left the ministry. I made $400, $350 a month right out of seminary, $350 a month, and never made, because I wouldn't let the church do it, never made more than $50,000 at our church, a church that's 2,700 members. I just think leaders have to eat last. You got to sacrifice. And when people see, boy, he must be serious, then I think people will then begin to consider change, because they can connect with another human being. And also, I don't believe you should agitate and legislate at the same time. You have to make a choice. You can't legislate and agitate. If you're going to be an agitator, don't run for public office. That's one of the problems we have right now. Is we have people who were agitators who have been successful in getting into the political realm, and they come in and pollute that realm because they're agitating inside a place where you should be legislating, and leave the agitating to somebody on the outside.
Yeah, as you said, you can't collect the pollen and make the honey and sting people at the same time, can you? So as we conclude, Congressman, again, thank you so much for your wisdom, your time, and for sharing your heart and perspective. What's your vision for the future of Missouri? What's your vision for where we're headed as neighbors? Where can we look to together?
I think Missouri is right in the middle of the country. We have some characteristics that are so important that most people miss it, and that is when you're in the middle of the country like Missouri. Corporations want to move here. I exploited that when I was mayor, because we're in the central time zone, which means that you can communicate to both coasts a lot more significantly than if you were on one of those coasts. And also the middle of the country is, I've always said, is the same section of the country. I mean, we don't export a lot of trends and fads, but the decision making seems to be a little more calmer in the Midwest. And many people probably don't know. I mean, we export $14 billion a year in soybeans and corn, and we also have a huge apple industry in Missouri that most people don't even know about. And we are becoming a multicultural state. And I think that in days to come, we're going to really get the attention of the whole world. And although this seems petty, but I think even sports plays a role of sending messages out. For example, you can't play on the Kansas City Chiefs and beat up women. The ownership will not. I mean, we lost a great running back 2 years ago because he was seen hitting a woman or kicking a woman. And the chief said, you can't stay on our team. So that player now is in Cleveland. Yeah. So I think, now you can do that. I mean, all you have to do, other teams will pick them up. But I think, we have a section of the city, for whatever reason, I think should be providing more leadership than it does. We have the capacity to do it. I think people are a lot calmer here, and you don't have to worry about people falling off mountains.
Well, Congressman, thanks for your heart for our state. Thank you for your heart for the region. And many, many decades of social leadership. Anything you want to leave us with before we close out here today?
I want people to understand that God is still on the throne. I don't care what you see happening in the world. It doesn't mean that God has abandoned or abdicated the throne. God is still sitting on the throne, looking out over his own. And I think we all are his own. We are the people of God. And I don't even think that it's blasphemous to say the blood of the prophets flow through our veins. That means we have work to do, and the day is short, and the work is hard. But my goodness, every time we achieve a little part of what God wants, it means the world has gotten better, even if it's just a little bitty piece of world that we occupy.
Congressman, thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for your heart and your many years of labor for all of us in this region. Look forward to having you back on the Social Leader podcast someday soon. Thanks so much.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Well, everybody, thank you again for joining me for the Social Leader podcast. Gosh, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Congressman Cleaver. And if you enjoyed this show, I have a huge favor to ask of you, though. I need you to hit that like button. I need you to share the show out. If you're watching us on Facebook, make sure you share it into all of your groups and share it with your friends. Look, everyone has the opportunity right now to operationalize and to actualize our social priorities. We don't just have to have charity sprinkles on the top. We have the opportunity, in fact, the necessity right now to really bake those social priorities into the cake of our leadership. And every one of us has the opportunity to do that, as you heard the congressman say today. So as we wrap up, I want to remind you that this show is presented by Reconciliation Services. And also, we want to tell you about our new e-course. You can go to thesocialleader.org if you want to learn more about how to increase your social impact as a leader. Until next time, I look forward to seeing you here, hopefully on Facebook or wherever I see you. And again, thank you to Congressman Cleaver for the wisdom he gave us today. Have a great day.